It's a pleasure to have you all here in this, first of our mobility events, the future of mobility. We're super excited at Powertrain Ventures to welcome you along with some of the top investors in the mobility space and some of the top founders in the same space. And we're super excited to be able to present this panel today in order to get to know a bit better what's going on in this super important part of our world, part of the disruptive innovation that is happening around us is very, very evident in the way in which mobility is affected, right? So today we have an all-star panel, and I would like to, begin by introducing the panelists today, and before we jump into the questions, right? So first we have on the investor side, we have a couple of people which we're super happy to count with today. Sam Baker. Sam is a mobility investor. He's the managing partner at the Mobility Fund. He's also a startup advisor, an entrepreneur. He was the founder of Wunder Mobility. And we're so happy to have him and so happy to have worked with the Mobility Fund team, particularly Bruno and Tatiana over these past few months in order to organize today's event. So we're super excited to have you, Sam. Also, from the investor side, we have Rodolfo Elias Dieck. Rodolfo is managing partner of Proesa Ventures. Rodolfo has been promoting the venture capital activity in the mobility space over these past few years and has an amazing experience also as director for some investment organizations such as FIMECAP and Promotora Social Mexico. We have on the startup side, Deepak Chugani, founder and CEO at Nuevo Cargo. Deepak is a very experienced, also an investor and entrepreneur, and he's been a partner for Bayshore Investment in the past, and we are super excited about hearing Deepak talk about what they're doing over at Nuevo Cargo. We also have Matt Silver. Matt is co-founder and CEO of Cargado, which are working on cross-border logistics. Matt has an amazing experience also as an angel investor for many companies in the space, and in the past has been, a manager for Coyote Logistics, which is one of the biggest ones in the space. Also, last in our panel is Santiago Zavala. Santiago is, leading the investments team over at 500 Startups, LATAM. And we're, so happy to have Santiago, who is looking at the whole innovation space and early stage entrepreneurship across LATAM, including, the exciting stuff that is happening in logistics, supply chain, and the movement of goods and people. So I would like to kick off the conversation to, just have everyone on the panel briefly just introduce themselves additionally to what I said, maybe something that I didn't include in this brief introduction, and basically why you feel that this space is such an important segment of the economy, and especially this new economy that is being created as we speak. So maybe we start in the opposite direction. Santiago, welcome.
Thanks, Francisco, and thanks everyone for the time and the opportunity to be here. Super interesting to spend some time talking about mobility. So, I mean, a little bit about myself and about 500. So we're an early stage investor. We have an accelerator program where we have been investing for Spanish-speaking LATAM since 2012. So we've done 4 funds, 300 investments. And from the very first fund, I think we started to see how international startups started to motivate us to solve one of the biggest problems that we have in Latin America, which is how people move. We started to see cities changing and different mobility options being available to customers. And I remember one of the very few investments that we did was Jaxi, which was the first cab hailing application in Mexico City, which it's a very big market for all the cab hailing applications now. And ultimately, Jaxi ended up being acquired by Cabify. We continue to be part of Cabify since then. So it's been very interesting to see in this decade how something that just came as an idea, as an inspiration of hey, we're seeing Uber in the US looking at this, starting to have people have their mobile phones and drivers have their mobile phones. Maybe we can find this marketplace. How do we adapt that to the Latin American reality? And now, having seen first Jaxi and Cabify expand, but also so many other companies, I was trying to make just kind of a small a search in our database of how many of the investments we've done in Latin America are mobility. And if we are strictly just mobility, is 18 out of the 300, so that's 6% of the investments that we've done. But if you see everything that is laterally connected, from ancillary to data to fintech, then that number is way higher. So of course, we're always looking at what's happening in the space. We think it's a very important industry, from electrification and sustainability to the customer demand and needs to be there. When we see obviously the B2B space, we also see a very big relationship with other industries like fintech. How do we bring better financial services to everyone involved in that supply chain, but also the interaction between countries? So from FX to regulations to speed and efficiency. So it's great to see Matt here, which he's obviously more of an expert on that piece. But yeah, super happy to be here and very excited to hear some of the companies that will be also pitching later.
Thank you, Santiago. Great to have you. So now maybe Matt, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. So I'm Matt Silver. I was previously, like you mentioned, at Coyote, built Coyote's Mexico business. Then I started a company called Forager that was a cross-border digital freight brokerage, and we got acquired by Arrive Logistics at the end of January of 2022. And then I left at the end of September of 2023 and started Cargado. And now we're building a platform to try to simplify a lot of cross-border freight and all the processes surrounding it.
Great, Matt. Thanks a lot. Deepak, welcome, Deepak.
Thank you, Francisco. Pleasure to meet all of you. Excited to be here. So my name is Deepak. The reason I'm building anything in LATAM, I always start with my parents are Indian, but I grew up in Ecuador, so I'm Latin American, and I've spent my whole career in everything at the intersection of the U.S. and Latin America, whether that was investment banking at B of A Merrill Lynch in New York and Mexico City, focused on Latin America, and then helping Latin American investors buy private equity real estate in the U.S. as well. Nuevo Cargo is a little under 5 years old. We're building a cross-border freight brokerage. It's funny because Matt used to be a competitor, and now we're friends, and I'm lucky to be a small investor in his company. But basically, Nuevo Cargo is building kind of a full stack brokerage that helps big brands. We work with some of the largest brands in the US and Mexico, streamline the very complicated process of moving their goods between the US and Mexico. And that means that we provide, we help you with transportation, but we help you with import export, insurance. We do factoring for truckers. And then obviously we build our own software to make all that experience better. We've raised about $75 million. We have teams in the US and Mexico, and made a ton of mistakes and learned a lot, and happy to share anything that's helpful to the entrepreneurs or investors or would-be startup people in the room. Un placer. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Deepak. Great having you. Sam, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Nice to be with everyone today. My name is Sam. I'm the managing partner at Mobility Fund. I like to think of myself first and foremost as an entrepreneur, though. In the last 10 years, I spent co-founding a startup called Wonder, which became the market leader for vehicle sharing solutions globally in terms of software in the background. The Mobility Fund is focused primarily on investing in early stage mobility technology companies at the seed stage across connectivity, autonomy, sharing, electrification. I think what sets us apart first and foremost, though, is that we are very interested in platform technologies that are running in the background and are maybe underappreciated in terms of the value that they bring to a particular mobility business. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you more examples about technologies that we're looking at or have invested in that kind of fit that thesis today.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam. Rodolfo, great having you today.
Thanks for the invitation, Francisco. Happy to be here with you all. Just very briefly, we launched Proesa Ventures back in 2020 with the mandate of investing exclusively in the mobility space, everything related to ground transportation. We're investing across 4 verticals, starting from smart components that go into the vehicle to make it electric, autonomous, or shared. New form factors, new vehicles from scooters all the way up to Class 8 trucks. Mobility as a service companies, and what we call digital data services, everything that is around the mobility experience to make it more efficient and sustainable. We have an international mandate. We are deploying about 70% of our fund in the Americas and 30% in Europe and Israel. We have 22 investments to date. We come in early at the seed stage, mostly between seed and A. That's like our sweet spot. Most of our investments have been in B2B, similar to what Sam was saying. We've invested in things that go unnoticed or behind the wheel. Just to say, like as an example. And yeah, I think Santiago and Matt were humble enough. Santiago has been with us in our investment committee for the last 5 years since we launched the fund. He's been a key piece helping us structure the fund and our activities. And with Matt, we have a long-standing relationship. We were investors in Forager, and now we're investors again in Cargado. So a couple of good links here with them.
Great. Thank you, Rodolfo. Great having you today. And well, you can see this is the cream of the cream in the mobility innovation space. And, most of these people have, already, it's not their first round. So I'm super excited to hear your thoughts on some of the ideas that we have been discussing, at Powertrain and with the founders that we work with the VCs and angels that we work with. And so the first topic that I would like to, introduce is mobility as a service, right? And you brushed upon mobility as a service briefly, but I would like to ask, to each of the panelists today, what are some of the most important trends that you guys are looking at currently in this space, right? Mobility as a service, and why are those trends interesting to you, or why should we care about them? Rolfo, you want to start out?
Sure. Thanks for putting me on the spot. No, it's interesting. When we first started looking at this space 5 years ago, we were noticing a lot of individual or separate solutions around mobility as a service. We came across what's probably the largest example of that company might be WIM or MAAS Global. I think they were based in or are based in Finland. Very successful there in their own country, but hard to scale outside of their home country. And it's because we saw all these different value propositions out there for instance, shared scooters, carpooling, car sharing, shuttles. You saw all the gamut of different mobility solutions, but there was something missing to bring them all together under the same umbrella to make the life easier of that person that is moving around in the city or going to work or something else. So what we are seeing today is that consolidation of those separate value propositions coming into one roof, or at least trying to address some of the same pain points, which is something that not everyone is willing to do today. And we've seen, for instance, employers with the pressure to add mobility services to their employees. That's been one of the key factors that someone doesn't take up on a job offer, because they want to know how much it's going to cost them to get to work, how long it's going to take, and all of that. So employers are being pushed to offer those kind of services. At the same time, they're being pushed to report on the emissions and all the different initiatives that they have ongoing to support going green and net zero initiatives. So with that, they're trying to come up with a solution that addresses all the needs of all their employee base, that it's able to give them mobility services to get to the factory if it's outside of the city. And now, after COVID, it become even more complex to manage some of those solutions, because people are going in for 1, 2, or 3 days, not the same day every week. So it's becoming more of a challenge to manage those kind of plans at the corporate level. At the same time, we've seen other companies launching micromobility services, providing subsidies for employees to acquire an e-bike or a scooter to get to work. So you're starting to see all these different trends, and we have a couple of investments in our portfolio that are addressing some of these pain points, and they're actually working together. We are investors in Ride Panda, that is providing leasing services to employers like Amazon, Google, and others, providing e-bikes and scooters. And then on the other side, we have BusUp, a company headquartered in Spain, that is providing bus shuttle services to companies. And the idea there is to share a bus among different companies that are headquartered around the same location in a city, and provide these kind of mobility services for the corporate. So that's a trend that we're seeing, and there's a lot of push both from the employee side and from the regulator side to provide more efficient mobility solutions for the employee population and the population in general.
That's great. Deepak, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think from the the founder's perspective, building something in the world of freight and transportation, when you say the phrase mobility as a service, at least what I've seen over the past 5 years, and granted there was a big boom and bust in the startup world, there was kind of a race to see startups that were getting built that were trying to go to different brands and help them actually provide transportation or some piece of it as a service, right? And so, one idea I could share with the crowd, since I'm assuming not everyone is spending all their time trying to become a freight expert or an expert in transportation, is at its core, a lot of what companies like ours are doing, and I think Matt and many other founders in freight, is, a lot of these brands, they're, whether it's a tequila brand, an aerospace brand, an industrial brand, they have done the hard work of building a product that the market wants. And supply chain is just kind of an important obstacle in the way of them achieving distribution and providing those products and services. Some of them make it a competitive advantage, but I honestly think that that's because they have to. And I think that where startups, or this phrase mobility as a service, resonates, at least for me, and what Nuevo Cargo is trying to do, is creating offerings where brands can focus on what they do best, which is creating a unique product or service, a physical product, and then letting someone else take this very complicated process of moving your goods, coordinating the goods, inventory management, managing your cross-border payments, all sorts of managing your suppliers, and outsourcing them to someone who can do that better. That's what we think at Nuevo Cargo when we think of this phrase of transportation really as a service.
That's great. Now, you talk about different types of innovation, both in the challenge of moving, people and goods. And, I think that, all of us here represent this new type of, disruption that's going on to do things in a way that's more efficient, better connected, better informed, right? Now, also, we're looking at some of the markets that have kind of the largest technical debt, right, in terms of infrastructure, right? So it's not the same challenge to launch some type of automated mobility service in, the States as it is in a Latin American country, right? So maybe, for, the rest of the panelists who have not yet talked a bit about these trends in mobility as a service, what are your views on this, and what are some of the challenges that you found are different in developed markets, as opposed to developing markets or emerging ones? Yeah, Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something that Deepak just said, which I think is really important. I mentioned in my intro that we're very interested in platform technologies and a bit of kind of what is the infrastructure for delivering the service. And when it comes to delivering mobility services, there's a lot of sort of unsexy things happening in the background, right? So moving vehicles around, financing them, cleaning them, servicing them, fueling them, all of that stuff is not necessarily as fun to talk to your friends about at a cocktail party in terms of that business and how it comes together. But it also presents a unique opportunity. And there's a sort of a thesis that we've been thinking about and exploring and researching more, which is sort of who are going to be the key infrastructure providers, the operators, the financiers of the mobility service infrastructure of the future. And an example of this underappreciated asset could be, for example, car dealerships, right? So if you think about car dealerships, it's a prevalent asset that exists in pretty much every country around the world, and with great distribution. And they essentially run, for lack of a better word, car rental operations in the background when they're offering courtesy transportation for their customers, as well as maintenance services for the warranties, et cetera. So when you think about all the components that need to come together to manage a fleet, service a fleet, finance a fleet, you have physical locations in major cities around the world. And so we've been looking very closely at technologies that you can layer software on top of those existing assets and get more utilization out of them and unlock new revenue streams. So yeah, whether it's an example like a Connection Mobility, which is doing this nationwide with GM in the US, would be a good example of that. And there are many others that are providing those sort of value-added services on top of the existing infrastructure. So just wanted to highlight that as a mobility as a service example. And maybe I'll just pause there. I do have some thoughts on the context of emerging markets, but I want to give other people the opportunity to comment on that. So.
I mean, why don't you share a bit with us, and then we'll jump onto the next panelist, because I definitely want to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the big topics that jumps out with respect to let's call it developed versus emerging markets, there's a big problem in general right now with the cost structure of operating EVs. Both the initial capex of buying EVs, because they're expensive to buy relative to internal combustion engine vehicles, but then also the operations don't appear to be optimized, because from our understanding, typically operators are treating electric vehicles like they would treat internal combustion vehicles in terms of how they operate them and fuel them and service them, which doesn't necessarily lead to optimal outcomes. And we can have a whole conversation about why that is, in terms of the variability of the range associated with the vehicle, depending on the context it's being driven in. But this is especially difficult when you already have a product that is more expensive to buy and more expensive to operate, and then you put that in a very highly competitive cost context. I think it makes the whole equation from a business perspective even more challenging. And it doesn't mean that just because a market isn't ready from a cost perspective, that there will never be EVs in that market. It just kind of pushes out the timeline a bit. There are exceptions to that. I mean, for example, Chile is very well known for having a pretty robust electric bus infrastructure. And I think there's a lot of unique situational context of why that's the case there. But in general, I think developing high growth developing markets are both facing this challenge of it just costs a lot of money to completely rethink and reinvest in your infrastructure, right?
Absolutely. That's one of the great challenges. Santiago, Matt, you guys would like to share your thoughts on this?
Sure, I could talk a little bit. I don't understand most of what Sam was just talking about with electric vehicles and mobility, but my opinion in terms of what's getting built in the space right now is I think there's there's a lot of service providers in the industry that need better technology to be able to do their jobs better, and I think the reality is that they're not going anywhere. Similar to how, Redfin and Zillow did not replace realtors the way that everybody thought they would. And so I think there's a need for better technology for those service providers that are in everything related to logistics, supply chain, mobility. And so I like a lot of the angel investments I've done have been in startups that are doing that. It's part of what we're working on is to support 3PLs and logistics providers, and trucking companies. But I think there's just going to be we're going to continue to move in that direction where you've got people that deal with the relationships and build relationships and manage them, and you've got people that are solving really complicated problems that might not be solved by technology, through large scales of automation, but most of the other work that they can do can be automated. And so better technology providers, better TMSs for the industry, better software kind of from top to bottom, I think is how the industry will move forward. And that's where I think there's a lot of exciting potential startups to be built.
Absolutely. And, I think that there are a few things in common here. A few of you have mentioned, not only B2B plays, but really, something that's going on in the background, right? These unsexy industries, right? And the thing is that it's just easier for you to take the existing infrastructure, transportation, and, be able to turbocharge the players that are already, having kind of the biggest movement in the space, rather than trying to disrupt the whole thing, right? So, Santiago, you have a wider view in your portfolio, right? So, what are your thoughts on these same type of challenges, specifically, regarding emerging markets and the challenges that are, most important to disrupt and to bring on new innovations in the space?
Sure. And I was going to say that maybe, these are abstract topics, and I love like everything that we've heard so far. It's super insightful, and thanks everyone. I think I agree with everything that has been said. When I think about like these kind of topics, for me, on that abstract side, what helps me is trying to build a framework on how we analyze investments, or how we work with our portfolio companies to use, the opportunities that are out there. And I think like when I originally started to hear like companies trying to propose a MAAS, no, or even a life as a service, and we were hearing a lot about these like super apps that wanted to be your single provider for everything, kind of like solve. You will never have to worry about your mobility or like even other things. I think it was very ambitious, and for a second there, even like just a little bit before the pandemic, when we had kind of like a rise in investment in Latin America and some players that had some inertia in that sense, for a second there, I thought like that was possible. And I think like it could be possible with a lot of like when the stars align in many senses, but it's really hard to achieve something like that. And with the disruption of the pandemic, and now with less investment in the world and in the region, I think it's very hard for one player to come and kind of like replace all the building blocks of a city, so that they can, try to solve a problem that is that big. But what we've seen on the other side is that the customer already has that experience. So it's kind of like a weird bipolar situation, where I feel like it's really hard for someone to win in that space and do like a single provider. But on the customer side, magically it happened, right? Like you have the way that you are planning your trips. You have, depending on your city, and if it's a B2B or B2C kind of space, it might be the place where you plan your trip. It might be the operator that your city has, where is your first contact with a mobility experience. But you already have like payments integrated, or you're starting to have that. You're having more transparency, more connection. Like it's starting just to work out, even though it's different providers and it's different startups. So that's where I think like Sam's investment thesis on building on the platform is what makes sense to us too, right? So we're looking at this opportunity and looking at the matrix of everything that you need, from planning to paying to insurance to like, I don't know, ancillary, even entertainment, like everything that can be related to the mobility experience. and where in your city that fits in, right? Kind of like the other situation that I think is very interesting is that in this whole process, we started to think for a moment there that everything was a startup. When in reality, some of these are clearly tech startups that are providing a platform service that can be scaled with technology, but others are mobility providers who are just tech enabled or very efficient or using a different kind of vehicle. And I think like separating those two and understanding if it's an investment opportunity for us has been a very interesting topic internally. If you go to Latin America, there might be places where innovation with a different kind of vehicle or different kind of infrastructure could be a big enough return. It might be more capital intensive than the pure tech play, but there is an opportunity. There might be other places where that opportunity doesn't exist. So we have to be very disciplined on understanding if we're investing into a pure tech play that it's more scalable with technology, and how do we think about that company versus a company that is, more capital intensive, and there might be regulations, there might be other kind of competitors. So I think when we look at that framework, that's where the LATAM versus other regions, it becomes really interesting to know that you're definitely leading with a different client that has a very different set of priorities. That is, going to be more sensible to the price. I mean, like getting someone in LATAM to top up to a wallet and like have credit for future mobility or pay a subscription instead of like just paying for what they need today. It's very different than in other regions. Might be a customer that is going to put a premium on security and safety way more than time or even convenience. So, there's very different aspects. There is less regulation, which sometimes is good because you can go fast and do things. But then when the government wants to regulate you, it can be a very big watershed moment for the startup. So there's definitely a lot of differences and a lot of opportunities in Latin America, and that's why we're investing. But that's kind of like the framework that we're using to think about this industry.
Great. So actually, that leads us to the next topic, which I believe is kind of the perfect example or of where you get the clash of these two civilizations, right? Cross-border logistics is what I would like to talk about next. And so if you bring in the regulatory aspect of cross-border logistics, you have a picture of let's put it in a more concrete way, right? Let's talk about, as an example, the Mexico-US border and cross-border logistics in that spot, because I think that we can relate fairly well to that. And so, which innovations and which tools can companies employ to navigate cross-border logistics effectively? And I would like to, start with maybe the startup founders who are looking at solving these type of problems, hearing out your thoughts. Matt, Deepak.
Go ahead, Matt.
So, what kind of tools people can be using in terms of managing cross-border freight better or getting more involved in it? I mean, there's a bunch of different parties involved in cross-border freight, right? So there's 7 or 8 typically between the pickup and delivery facilities. You've got 2 different customs brokers, potentially 3 different trucking companies. There's generating paperwork that needs solutions. There's managing the actual freight. There's arranging the driver aspect of it and making sure the drivers are actually picking up the loads. There's the generation of the customs paperwork that goes along with this whole process. And there's visibility for the entire thing. And then there's also the sourcing side of it. And I could just continue to list off kind of the other little pieces of it, but cross-border freight can be really complicated. And so it's I think on one side, what I always tell people in like the shipping side is, if they're working at a manufacturer or distributor, is working with a partner that actually understands how to manage all those problems, because last thing you want to do is hand something off. Like, your supply chain strategy to somebody that doesn't know what they're doing. And so having a provider that can handle all the issues that happen at the border with the customs broker is critical. Having somebody that understands the carrier network and can manage the carriers is really important. So it's finding the right suppliers and the right technology solutions that can kind of help you with the end-to-end process.
That's great. And do you believe that, the main challenges that companies looking to transport goods across borders are finding have to do with, the difference in kind of these infrastructure levels between countries and let's say logistics infrastructure, right? Roads and so on, regulatory authorities, processes, and so on? Or do you believe that, some of the bigger challenges have more to do with the communication challenges that you guys are also helping solve between parties in different countries?
So the transportation decision makers, like the issues that they're having with cross-border freight, usually boil down to a couple things. One is most of the freight that they're managing, especially if they're based in the US, but they oversee their cross-border business, most of their freight's domestic US freight that they're normally used to handling. And so maybe their cross-border business might represent 10 or 15% of their business, and they're not going to think a lot about that part. And so to them, it's literally foreign, it's figuratively foreign, it doesn't make any sense to them. There's a lot of stuff going on in a different language with a different culture across the border. Everybody calls it kind of a black hole at the border. And so they don't understand it, number one. And then number two, when it comes to cross-border freight and specifically manufacturing in Mexico, the way that I compare cross-border and domestic is that manufacturing in Mexico is a lot more about like the production of something and the earlier part of a supply chain, whereas domestic US freight is distribution and it's going to consumers at that point. And so if you jam up somebody's supply chain earlier in the process, like I remember at Forager, we shut down consumer products companies, supply chain around their guacamole they were bringing out of Mexico, and it was a big deal. And like they were not happy about it. And had it been like a move from one of their plants to a grocery store, that'd be different. But we stopped their whole supply chain. And so working with somebody that can kind of handle that entire process is really important, that like you don't have them screwed up like that. But it boils down to the fact that like they don't have enough experience handling that freight. And so to them, they don't understand it. And then the second issue is that it boils down to either price, service, or complexity for a lot of shippers. And so they're either trying to save money on their freight spend, or they're doing both of these things, which is saving money on their freight spend, making sure their freight picks up and delivers on time, and making sure they've got somebody that's kind of solving the problems for them that knows how to solve those problems.
Totally agree.
If I can add to that, Francisco.
Sure.
By the way, can you guys hear me? I feel like it's freezing up for me. It's good? Perfect. Yeah, just to complement to a lot of the things Matt said and to answer some of your questions, Francisco, I think it's both. I think it's you have complexity because of the different cultures and laws and jurisdictions, and then also the communication issues, or what we call kind of the broken telephone, because of all the different parties involved, right? So I think there's many ways to add value. I think what Matt's building is incredible, and I've seen other innovative parties trying to chip off a little piece of the supply chain, whether it's payments or factoring. In our case, we've built purpose-built workflow software that accommodates for all the different permutations of a cross-border shipment. So to your point, no one has a lot of the players that are doing domestic freight that Matt was talking about. They have systems, they have transportation management systems that are not designed to deal with the border, deal with all the added 5, 6, 7 stakeholders, deal with the different currencies. If a shipment delivers on the Mexican side, suddenly it might need to be in pesos. It needs to have, the Mexican tax added to the invoice, or, if it actually delivers on the US side of the border, you have to bill another entity. That's one example where complexity can get created and make things really complicated for the shipper and create a lot of administrative work. Another example is there's actually many different ways you can move freight between the US and Mexico. You can do a direct shipment, which is kind of the same trailer through and through, or you can do transload where you're changing the trailer where the goods are. And so just dealing with the communications, the visibility, the compliance, all the way down to just things that keep your invoices and the data that you have on your shipments clean creates a lot of complexity. And I think it's a good example of all the complexities in international trade. And so we've built software to streamline that and try to add different service offerings. So, in any lane at Nuvo Cargo, you can add customs, you can add insurance. So we're trying to add value so that, processes that other customers might have where they have to hire those 7 to 10 different companies, they can just do it with one company, but you still have to natively integrate with their TMS or their ERP and work with their system, kind of to Santiago's point. You can't be everything to everyone. It's way too complicated in industries that are this entrenched with customers that all have such unique supply chains, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, for that reason, when we sit down with founders who are at an earlier stage and thinking about how to deploy their strategy, we figure most of the time it's better to look for point solutions that come to solve, one piece of the puzzle rather than try to figure out how to innovate at every step. And so, Nuvo, for instance, Deepak is looking for a way to solve kind of an end-to-end situation for this type of logistic challenges. And so how do you feel, how wide a net can you cast in terms of tackling some of these use cases that are very, some of them very typical in cross-border logistics, some of them not so?
Yeah, on our side, I think Matt put it really well. Like, the decision maker that we sell to is typically a US decision maker that manages North America freight. And in some cases, a lot of our customers, it's the same person and same department that's managing ocean, air, rail, and they really are seeing a really wide gambit. And so we actually come in my view, with a really focused pitch, which is, hey, this volume, which is 10, 20% of your freight, which is cross-border, it's complex. Other providers don't know what they're doing. They've just kind of added it on. They're cross-selling it to you, and we can provide a better experience. So our pitch is really focused in the sense that we tell them, this 10, 20% of your volume, that's probably accounting for a larger proportion of your day-to-day problems and administrative headaches. We have an integrated solution, and we're not telling them, let me do your last mile, let me do your domestic freight. We're just telling them those shipments that you're doing, origin and destination to Mexico, we can take care of the end-to-end of that experience. So we can do the freight on both sides of the border, we can do the customs, we can do the insurance. And that means that the reports that we end up sending you at the end of the week or end of the month for your supply chain department to make better decisions are more reliable. And the tracking and visibility that you get for those shipments is also more reliable, right? And so where we've been able to chip off a piece of the supply chain is we have some customers that have actually told us, and many of those are renewing this year, take this whole chunk of the supply chain and you run it, and you help me run my transportation budget. But we've seen other startups that do 12 modes of transports, 10 countries. I just don't know how you build technology or have a really focused solution if you tackle on that much. In our case, we do something quite focused, but we think that you need to run the execution of the service as well to really add value for the customers. At least that's been our stance and our view, right?
Absolutely. Sam?
Yeah, I just wanted to share a couple other examples that we've been seeing where the complexity of international borders can kind of work in your favor, or on the other hand, where it doesn't work in your favor. One positive example is a company that we invested in very recently called Skyflow, which is a European software firm that's helping manage last mile deliveries for drones for kind of high value cargo, like last minute medical devices that are needed, for example. And up until recently in Europe, there was a regulatory restriction around flying over sort of what they would define as sort of densely populated urban environments. And that's changed recently. So now you can all of a sudden fly drones over sort of most European cities. But one of the challenges is that you need to log your flight route and as a plane would if you were flying like a commercial plane. And typically that right is reserved for airlines. And this particular startup, Skyflow, leveraged the sort of the unification that exists among regulation in the EU to apply in a relatively low friction country of Ireland, where apparently you can get through the application process of applying for the ability to log flight routes in a more streamlined way. So they get approved in Ireland, and then that approval then extends EU-wide. So now all of a sudden they're the first startup that can essentially coordinate flight routes for drones over densely populated cities in Europe. So that unified European Union, but at the same time complex regulatory environment is working in their favor because they've been able to get ahead of it and use it as a competitive advantage. I wanted to share another example where the regional complexity is not working in the favor of a company. We spoke to some folks at Toyota recently. I was not aware of this, so maybe this is not news to others on the call, but in the bid to try to get vehicles connected to the internet, of course, a lot of automotive makers are trying to put connectivity into their cars and then offer up APIs or connection points into their vehicles so you can build services on top of them. I wasn't aware of this, but apparently Toyota is working on different regional standards for that connectivity software, so that the connectivity platform in Latin America, at least for the next few years, is going to be different than the connectivity platform in Japan, which will be different than the connectivity platform in Europe. So if you think about the analogy of, like an iPhone, right, and building a software for the iPhone ecosystem, imagine if you all of a sudden have I'm very much oversimplifying it here, but you have like different standards for different regions, and you have different software ecosystems to develop on top of the car. It sounds like a total nightmare, and really not advantageous for the OEMs in terms of building a vibrant ecosystem of services to build on top of their cars. So again, just sharing two examples of where these borders become very advantageous and then also very problematic on the other hand. So
totally kind of both extremes there, and I think that goes to show that there's really not kind of a silver bullet for all of the challenges that we're looking at. And so we definitely expect for many types of solution, many formats, right, that complement each other. And actually these topics are great to bring in the next topic. And before I do so, I just want to remind everyone on the call that, at the end of this topic, in around 10 minutes time, we're going to be starting the pitch event, where we're going to have around 10 mobility startups, mostly in the pre-seed and seed stages, who are going to, pitch their startups to us. And, I would like to thank beforehand also all of the panelists to also stay on the call and be part of the Q&A panel for these founders and help them out in, thinking about some of the bigger topics that they should be looking at. All right. So having said that, the next topic I want to introduce is the future of AI in mobility. Okay, so we have not discussed much about AI, but all of the technologies that we're talking about definitely have some type of automated aspect to them. So, I'd like to open the floor for all of the panelists to maybe, share with us which of the advancements that are happening in the space do you expect to see in the near future, compared to those that maybe are going to come in, but at a much longer time horizon.
I've been seeing a ton of startups trying the AI wrapper thing to automate, a workflow piece for a freight brokerage. Like, I actually invested in one, and I'm excited about them, but like they've got a bunch of people to compete with now. And it's reaching out to drivers to get updates on loads or to try to negotiate with them or to do tracking. And I think that's exciting, but there's a lot of people that are starting to do it. And so I think the best way that companies today are using AI is kind of that co-pilot model with like our team is doing it with GitHub and everything, whatever the AI plugin is for that. So that's my only comment I would make on AI, is that it seems like there's a lot of what seems to be really exciting startups that are kind of AI wrappers, and I don't know that that's Those feel like more like features than full platforms.
Just to complement,
Yep.
just to complement what Matt was saying is, we were part of YC, and I still go back and I spoke with one of the recent batches, and it was crazy to see how the partners at YC told me that the last couple batches, the volume and velocity of pivots has never been as high. Every time OpenAI releases something, the whole batch is like pivoting or feeling like they're getting killed. And I've also started hearing, for me, AI is it's moving so fast that it can be intimidating. And what I'm hearing from the smartest people that I know on the topic, like some of our investors in Silicon Valley that are seeing pitches every day, is that, like Matt said, if you're just building like a superficial, easy feature on top of OpenAI, like we've been pitched by dozens of those startups. And every time they do something really cool, like taking 40 PDFs in an email and putting all the data structured in our database, things that to me, as an originally non-technical person, are impressive, my team will tell me, they'll say, oh, this is worth 40 grand a year. And they're like, we built it last night and we're not going to pay that. Right. So I see that it's moving really, really fast. And I actually think that the narrower you go into business problems and business logic that you understand, LLMs now create the opportunity to automate those workflows that wasn't possible in the past. And so I think that if you're in the middle, in the daily workflows of your company, you have proprietary business logic that you see that can't just be on the open web with Google. That's what I'm hearing from a lot of our advisors and mentors, whether it's YC or other founders. That's where you can build unique advantages in AI outside of just general productivity increases to run a much more efficient business with less humans, right? So I think for very human-driven businesses, it's actually a very exciting time to think about setting the right infrastructure on the data side so you can take these discrete tasks and use AI to automate them in a way that someone externally can't because they don't have your business logic in their day-to-day workflows.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and if we bring that down to mobility, I mean, AI started to make inroads a few years ago with all the wave of autonomous vehicles and all related technologies around that. But these days, what we're seeing in terms of AI, I think it's more on the engineering and research and development side, just speeding up the process to come up with new designs for automobiles or for batteries and see what's working and what's not, and have a faster process to get product to market. Also in manufacturing and industrial facilities, you get AI serving as a quality assurance tool to make sure that everything that is coming out of the factory lines, it's in the right quality, in the right standards. But we're seeing more applied technologies today, and I think there's a few companies that are making good inroads there as well. Also in the EV space, we've seen a lot of companies with AI tools to help with smart charging, know where the chargers are, if they're open or not, and how fast you can charge, and what's the optimal time to charge, the lowest cost and most green energy that you can use. So there's a diverse use cases across mobility where AI has been already developed, and it's developing even faster these last 18 months. That's a word that it's on everyone's top of mind right now.
Totally. So we've seen some comments that go more towards the kind of the client-facing or user-facing side, like these large language models, and how they're being used as wrappers to interact with the information that is a bit more structured, right? And we're also, Rolf, you're mentioning some of these more kind of happening in the background, like design and engineering-oriented cases to use more of a deep tech, I would say, probably, right? Sam, you wanna share your comments with us?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up quickly on what Rodolfo was saying with EVs. There seems to be a kind of a common misconception that EVs are simpler vehicles because they have significantly less components. But if you talk to repair shop, dealership groups, large repair networks, their concern is that actually EVs in many circumstances are actually more complicated in terms of the technical level that's required to service them. So when you think about things like, those sensors that can tell how far the car is in front of you and everything, to calibrate those properly is not like a super easy task. And you can imagine the risks associated with not calibrating the sensors for the distance of the car in front of you. So so there's complexity with training the sort of the workforce of the future. And at the same time, if you go to any, I mean, not any, but many markets, they'll say they're having labor shortages around qualified technicians for servicing the vehicles. So on the one hand, you have more complicated systems coming up, and then you have a difficult time finding labor. So supplementing the training with tools that kind of can help technicians find the information that they need faster and be guided through the process of knowing how to repair a particular problem is a very interesting space. Again, it's not sexy, but it's a very high value from a business perspective. And company in Germany, for example, that's doing this, DC Connected, has ingested repair invoice information from large repair networks in Europe to understand problem statement, solution that was resolved the issue, and they've done this at scale and are providing a service of a way for technicians to kind of quickly query common problems. So I do think that there's a lot of interesting applications for AI in these sort of platform businesses, but they're not as apparent to the end user. I think at the end of the day, the ones that are really high value, at least in the short term.
Great. So super interesting. And right now, maybe, to move into the pitch, I would like to ask each of the participants in the panel right now to maybe wrap up some of the main ideas that we have discussed over the past hour, and especially how are these important to you, or which are the main challenges that you as a fund manager or as a startup CEO are interested in seeing solved or evolved over the next couple of years, so that these are more in line with your strategies?
I can start, Francisco. I'm actually late to another call, so I'll have to drop.
Sure, Deepak.
But I just wanted to say,
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. I think it's great that there's more startup communities and groups and funds like Powertrain and some of the funds here, because mobility and transportation is a crucial sector to the global economy. Even if it's not transportation in isolation, it moves a huge chunk of global GDP, and it's still quite outdated, and there's a lot of opportunity. So I think it's really exciting. I think there's a huge number of things, whether it's AI, autonomous trucks, electric trucks. There's all sorts of exciting things that are coming for people that are looking at Latin America. There's also nearshoring, which is a very exciting trend and an opportunity to capitalize on. So I think there's a lot to be built. A lot of startups can be built, a lot of companies that we can help improve their businesses with technology or just with a much better offering. And so I really appreciate the chance to meet you all. And if I can be helpful in any way, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepak.
I could give a little bit of quick advice, I guess, from my perspective, which is staying focused early is, I think, really important. Building a startup and not trying to go solve every single problem at the same time, but focusing more on solving something simple that a large group of or it could be it doesn't have to be large, but a group of customers, has that. If they all have that same problem, try to solve that problem first before trying to go tackle everything else. And I also don't think it's the path of trying to disrupt the existing providers is necessarily the right way to go about attacking it. So be my kind of parting advice.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, very, very much in line with our views too. So
I can
next. Yep.
I can quickly mention there. I mean, going to the last question, definitely AI is transforming every industry, and mobility, I think, has been, just as some other ones like credit, for example, been using machine learning for a long time to do autonomous. So I think, ultimately the region and the world needs cheap, efficient, affordable, safe, sustainable transportation in every part of the economy. So anyone who's looking at supporting that, we would love to talk to you from 500. I'm putting on the chat my email and my LinkedIn. Really open to do a deeper dive into anyone's company if you're doing a startup in the region, or if we can be useful for anyone.
Thank you, Santiago.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. And I think it's exciting times for us. The wave of innovation doesn't stop. If anything, it becomes harder for us as investors, just seeing all the right the volume of deal flow that we're getting, and also keeping up to speed on the new technologies and dissecting what's a good platform play and what's just a feature that we were talking about. So I think it's exciting times. Mobility has gone through a difficult wave over the last year or so with some issues there with the AV space in particular. But we're very excited about the future and all the technologies that we're seeing coming out of LATAM and the US and Europe as well. So also very open to hearing more pitches and talking to the founders that are here in this group today.
Thank you so much, Rodolfo. Okay, so any last comments from the panelists? Okay, so I'd like to open up the mic, to all of the participants before we jump into the startup pitches, just for a quick round of Q&A for today's panelists. And I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. And so if you would like to, put them on the text or raise your hand and present them directly, that would be even better. And maybe if you want to just say to whom the question is directed, or if it's, for all of the participants. You can also try raising your hand, and the gesture is gonna actually put you on the queue. No questions. No questions. So either, they understood everything you said or nothing at all. Okay. Few more seconds, guys, because we're gonna jump into the, pitches, and then the questions are for the startup founders. So great. So we have almost 80 people on the call today. I'm super excited about today's event. I'll share very briefly, a bit about what we're doing over at Powertrain. So we have a very mobility related brand. Okay, and just this week we are launching our new brand identity, so we're very happy about that. But we're not only in the mobility space, we are in a much wider space, early stage impact venturing and acceleration, right? So we have a few acceleration programs, and we are looking at the most kind of relevant program for us, which is a 4-month acceleration program for early stage startups in the pre-seed and seed stages. And the open pitch event is one in which we have been so happy to have very, very innovative startup founders take part. And so today, we will be marking the first one that is totally devoted to one topic, and that's mobility, to couple that with the discussion that we just had. And so we're super excited to take the time to drill in and to zoom in to this specific event. Now, before I bring in the first participant, I would like to just make a 2-minute pause, so that, if you need a couple of minutes just to help yourself for a cup of coffee or something, that's fine. And I'll introduce the startup founder then, okay? So a couple of minutes for you guys to take a quick break, and I'll see you guys back.